Hi, I'm Caroline Payson. I'm Director of Education at the Cooper Hewitt National Design Museum, and I'd like to welcome you here tonight as we're celebrating design and design education during National Design Week. We've been having events every day this week, as well as free admission at the museum, and this is a great opportunity for you to see our new exhibition, Design USA, which is a celebration of the past 10 years of National Design Award winners. Yesterday, we welcomed over 500 high school students from New York City to the same space, where they were able to meet design mentors ranging from Tim Gunn, architects from Shop, designers from Google and Nike. All of the last several designers were National Design Award winners. This morning, we were in the same space where we hosted a panel on the business of design, moderated by Daniel Pink. And tomorrow, up at the museum, we'll be offering free screenings of the design documentary Objectified. This week's events will culminate on Thursday night with the National Design Awards Gala, where we will unveil the People's Design Award winner and honor our National Design Award winners. And we're thrilled to have those winners with us here tonight for what promises to be a lively discussion with an extraordinary group of designers from every field. But before we get started, I'd like to extend a huge thank you to Target. Without their incredible generosity, none of National Design Week events or the National Design Awards would be possible. We thank Target for this continued support of design and design education. I'd like to introduce our moderator, Walter Hood, who is this year's winner for National Design Award winner for landscape design. Walter is the founder of Hood Design, a landscape design firm based in Oakland, California. He teaches extensively and is responsible for the beautifully integrated DeYoung Museum grounds in San Francisco's Golden Gate Park. Please join me in welcoming Walter Hood.
Good evening, everyone. Bear with me a little bit. I just arrived from the West Coast and an hour circling New York City because our president is here. So I'm a little jet lagged, but I'm in great esteemed company here. This is the winner circle. This is not the Kentucky Derby, but this is the circle of winners here, great colleagues. And I'd just like to sort of introduce each one, not in order, so you can just sort of raise your hand. First, Chris Sharples from Shop Architect. They're the architecture winners for this year. Chris is principal of a 60-person practice here in New York with his other 3 principals who are, maybe they're 4, but they're all married and they have this very interesting relationship. The next winner this year is Andrew Blauvelt, the director of the Walker Arts Center. And as you guys know, the Walker Arts Center has hosted some really groundbreaking shows and a new facility in Minneapolis. The next winner for this year in product design is Laurene Boym, and she is going to answer all the questions tonight for us.
Thank you.
Our next winner tonight is Amory Lovins, who gives great back rubs. I can attest to that. Just gave me a fantastic one.
Trying to wake him up.
He's our designed mind winner of this year. Our next winner is Steve Duenes. I hope I pronounced that right. Duenes, graphic director of the New York Times, and this year's winner for communication. And Calvin Tsao, interior design winner, down here on my left. Jeff Hahn from Perceptive Pixel, just got off work right around the corner. And myself, Walter Hood, who will be moderating with these guys tonight. Well, the fantastic thing about winning this award is you get to hang out with just very interesting people who don't do what you do. But I think one commonality is we're designers, and I think we're designers in the most broadest of terms. So I'd like to just start out, Laurene, with the first question. I told you you're going to answer all of them.
This seems to be a trend, actually.
Ladies first.
My first question to the panel, and I'd like you to start this, is design a luxury or necessity in your mind?
Well, that's an interesting question, Walter, while I think about it for a minute. I actually was talking about this a bit last week. I think in general, design performs a lot of different functions. And it's not necessarily like a physical function, but there's this whole emotional thing that, luxury sort of falls under, this kind, identity. self-identity and, having some sort of relationship to the objects and all that. And it doesn't really quite, it's kind of an awkward question, because the thing is it a luxury? Not really. Is it a necessity? Yes. Everything is a tool of life, and tools of life are necessities. But the little things that bring design to the next level are the luxuries. Things like, the emotional response and, the way people relate to it, or if it's a collectible or something like that.
Amory, would you concur with that, or do you have a different perspective?
Everybody does design all the time. Design is what translates intention into effect. And you can do good or bad design. You can do beautiful or ugly design. And anybody can do design. I recently designed a building with some talking bonobos, which is a kind of great ape. They do about 3,000 words of English, so you can ask them what they want and they tell you. So we put them on the team and did interspecies design, which is quite a trip. Yeah. I'm happy to report there is intelligent life on Earth, even if it's not us. But design is not confined to any individual or even to our species. Orangutans put a beautiful flower on the edge of their nest they make every night. Why do they do that? I would say for them it's a necessity.
It's a necessity. Yeah.
Without beauty, what are we?
Well, architects are always sort of, notorious for being very prescriptive about, some of their ideas. And Chris, when we sort of think about this notion of necessity or luxury, when you're designing a building and there are certain things that, let's say the client might ask for that might seem beyond the bound or the call of duty, how do you handle those issues?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't say it'd be prescriptive for us. It'd be more performative, which is important distinction. But when a client, actually, to tell you the truth, when a client starts going in that direction, we get excited. That means that they're starting to dream and sort of embrace some of the thinking that's occurring during the process. And we definitely want to motivate or keep that type of energy going. But it's all about, and I sort of see it both a luxury and a necessity. Because as you were mentioning, there is an emotive side to this. We take delight in a lot of what we do and what we share with other people. And I think that's very key to good design, that it's delightful. Mm-hmm. At the same time, it's also solving problems, and it's providing an opportunity to actually innovate. And that's something that requires a strong dialogue with not only the client, but the people who actually execute the work. And so with every project, it's the design problem is always different, and the way that you come to a solution is often different. So it's sort of straddling both worlds, the emotive one and then the more, let's say, pragmatic one.
Right, the more pragmatic. For Andrew, I would ask the question, this notion of designing a space or a set of experience and the user not knowing the designer's hand is there, have you had much experience?
Well, in terms of designing spaces, when we expanded a new walk, or we put together a team of people under the rubric of experience design, but we define that very differently than, say, AIGA would. For them, that's a new media term. It came out of new media, but for us, it's about physical space and how users would encounter that space. So we work together with education specialists, technologists, myself as a designer, of course the architects, in this case it's Herzog and Miron, and we tried to come at the problem a little bit differently. There's the users always part of that equation, but we try to imagine what would be. A lot of people sit around and say, what does the audience want? What does the user want? But these, they're going to typically ask for things that they know, and so I think designers' jobs are to imagine what could be, so that their answer would be, I wanted that, but I didn't know I wanted that.
Right.
That's what I hope for.
Well, a follow-up to that, since you're at a museum, do you take pride when you have visitors come through? And I guess it's a two-part question, and they know it's a Herzog building and they're just taking pictures, or the one that comes through and they're completely oblivious of the designer, but they found something in the building?
I think the most interesting responses were the more intimate scale. It's hard to explain, but there's some grand spaces, but there were never any large spaces, so there were no overwhelming spaces. But it was trying to approach the sort of circulation of the space of the museum as there's certain devices that were done. Even though the curtain wall is like 20 feet tall, half of it's etched, so it really brings the visual feel down to about 8 feet, which is like walking into a living room almost. There's these huge chandeliers that come down. You don't expect to find chandeliers. Of course, they're not typical chandeliers in our museum, but it domesticates the space, is how I would describe it. And so those kinds of reactions that are more about the physicality of the space. There's a large sloping ramp. You feel the gravity walking through the architecture. It's those sensibilities, I think, that's more intuitive to people, and I think those are what I find the most interesting.
Steve, I guess this question for someone working with graphics, do you imagine or do you have a picture of your client in mind when you're designing? Which is unlike an architect, which might be a kind of a singular user.
Yeah, actually, I do want to answer the question you got to answer. I'll answer that question too. But to be invisible as the designer is kind of the point for us. And our design is kind of in the service of journalism. We are trying to provide readers with access to information, and the design is on the surface. If the readers are, really aware of it, then it's probably getting in the way of the data that we're trying to display. Do we picture our readers as we design? I think a little bit. We try to, get a sense of how they, would read through a piece that we're working on, and we design accordingly. We kind of put ourselves in their place, and the award for communication design did not go to me. It went to the whole desk. There are 25 of us, and we work really collaboratively and show work. We work in little teams of 3 or 4 people, and we show work around in the department, and try to get that reaction, kind of a reader reaction from other members of the department. So I think we do kind of put ourselves in their shoes and try to picture it a little bit.
Well, when I think of newspapers and type and text, I think of scale. Like picking up a newspaper, and the first thing you see is the largest, versus the smallest, which is a form of design, right?
Sure.
Which is a way of getting people in. Have you had discussions about kind of changing those kinds of, ways or patterns and practices?
You mean changing how you develop a hierarchy for the information?
Yeah, how a user might go through your product.
I think those kinds of discussions are coming up more as we've done more interactive work. The desk, up until about 4 years ago, we were really focused on just the printed newspaper. And since 2005, 2006, we've been working on most of the interactive graphics. And, there are fewer formulas. You mentioned scale as a way to organize information, and it works, in print. And it works also, as you develop an interactive piece. But there are other ways to do it, and, fewer rules. And so I don't know that we're looking to change the rules that exist, but I think we sort of feel like we're, trying to develop some of those rules as we work through different problems for interactive pieces.
I guess this leads into the next question. This is for Calvin. Do you think design is a global language?
I think
Or have we reached that?
I think truly good design goes beyond global. I think the globe is very limiting, especially for concerns that we have right now. Because ultimately, it's about the spirituality goes beyond the earthly conditions. Of course, there are phenomenology involved in physical perception, which whether it's you do it invisibly or visibly or iconically or very in a signature way, it communicates a sign of our times, our temperament of a period. And I think that they all are relevant depending on what era, what sensibility, what mental state our culture is in. So I don't really think there's one better over the other, although I certainly personally think that the best designs are ones that transcends all those periods to cut through time, cut through geography, cut through history, and you can appreciate it as what it is, and it morphs because you can see it in so many different frames of references.
I've seen some Chinese ceramics recently that were over 3,000 years old and look astoundingly modern, but really timeless. But there are important cultural differences when you talk about the globality of design. When I go to Japan, there's a much higher probability that a faucet or a handle or something my hand interacts with is going to be not just very functional but pleasurable to touch.
Right.
And the rest of us haven't got as good at that yet. The waterfall in a Japanese temple may be tuned to alpha rhythm. After a few thousand years, you get good at that sort of thing.
It's interesting. Someone asked me recently, what are my favorite spaces? And out of the blue, I just pulled two out of my mind. One, which is the Pantheon, and the other one is, I don't know where it came from my mind, but the Hall of Mirrors in Versailles. And you know, and I think it somewhat exemplifies a point of the either eternally modern things or things that are just of a moment. But in some ways, anthropologically, it's interesting too, because it really says so much about Louis XVI, you know, and all the lessons that we can learn from that moment, and with all the conceits and concerns and obsessions that go into creating that room. And I think all of that is design. You know, I have designs on you. You have designs on her. You know, what that word is so loaded. So it's both in a kind of metaphysically cosmic place, but it also can be very specific, and to be not ashamed of that too.
Any others want to add?
I think you're actually kind of treading onto psychological territory with this. A little bit, you know?
Yeah.
This is like...
And?
But I mean, there's this whole, like, different, you know, there's a big, you know, discussion about design, you know, and its effect on people. And, you know, I don't know if the conversation goes this way or that way, but, you know, I think it's a very important component, obviously, of, like, everybody on the stage's work. Does anybody want to add anything to that?
Well, I would say that, you know, it's funny because I've spent a lot of time in Japan as well, and I think there's usually a certain degree of sensitivity there, and part of that is because it's more of a monoculture, and also it's a culture built over a refining process, and it's an island culture, so it's been able to control that. And in this country, there is I don't want to say it in a very negative way, but it sort of is negative, is that we lack that sort of type of. There's a lack of education when it comes to design, especially in the last century. It's very different from what, you know, if you look at how people embrace Shaker furniture and medicine and things in the 18th century, and then the Industrial Revolution happened, and everybody just embraced standardization. Everybody could get at it. But, you know, there definitely seems like our visual education has stopped at second grade. Now, obviously, that's sort of changing now as a result of, you know, the gaming industry and visualization with the computer. But there seems to be, and I've noticed since 9/11, a strong desire in this city to engage the built environment, to try and understand how, you know, everybody can actually influence how things look and get done here. And so there is this strong desire, but to be able to talk about it and engage it is something that's very difficult to sort of come back to the idea of when you talk to clients. Sometimes you especially when we're dealing with groups, especially at universities, we ask well, what do you like? What works for you? And there's a silence. So we go from the opposite end. We say, what doesn't work for you? And suddenly they start talking.
Right.
They have an opinion about that.
It's interesting, though. Can I say something?
Sure.
I don't want to dominate, but it's fascinating. But one of the questions that I was thinking about is invisible or being a leader. I mean, in some ways, good design is the thing that is the connector that makes everyone a common denominator, consensus. Everyone loves something. And in Japan, whether it's an island nation or because of whatever reason, there's an incredible consensus in that culture about what is Shibuya, what is wabi-sabi, and what's this and that. And they go for it. There's a kind of worldview.
Well, it's a homogenous culture, too.
I mean, there's downside to that, too, of course, I'm sure, but in a kind of consensus. And also, I think people who are in a role of creating things, design, they also take on shamanistic responsibilities. And here, design is a service, and there's some issues, where there's a hierarchical condition coming in when you are of service, which of course we're providing service. But I think that tight role of providing design service shackles us in so many ways in terms of relationship of dialogue with the end user, with the people who are commissioning whatever the product, the things that we're working on, and marginalize them into different corners rather than saying, you're instigating something, we're facilitating something, and everybody can enjoy something.
Well, it seems like design, one of the things that you guys are commenting on, this notion to be very optimistic about what we do, right? That has this ability to cross boundaries. But particularly here in America, dealing with this idea of homogeneity, but being a very set of diverse cultures, I've been able to sort of see how different cultures embrace different things across the board. So you really get this fantastic cultural sharing, whether it's a 65 Chevy or whether it's, a new espresso machine or whether it's, the latest Target, stuff. But it's this fantastic thing, I think, design, if you're an optimist in that way, that it does cross boundaries. I guess this next question is for all of you. I have two questions for the whole gang. Do all of your parents understand, or did they understand what you do?
That's it.
And I'll start here.
I'll answer that. That's actually really interesting. I've actually been an engineer my entire life. I was exactly that cliche math and science kid. Took apart everything. Once in a while, put it back together, but usually there were a lot of screws left over. And I was exactly that quintessential engineer from the beginning. And of course, at a certain age, my parents kind of didn't get what I was doing, but I was doing engineering, but there was a certain abstraction away, like, oh, I'm doing something. And for most of my career, until I actually did this recent work, it was really interesting for them. My dad actually pulled me aside, and when he actually heard about what I was working on, and then we launched the work and saw it in person. He goes, "Wow, this is something I get. I really understand its impact." Obviously, for him personally, this is literally, the work we're doing in interface design literally is about widening the spectrum of computing, of accessibility computing. So literally, it's just, everyone's had this experience. Yeah, you're trying to teach your parents how to use a mouse, nowadays, that kind of thing, or your grandparents, or even little kids. But literally, he gets it now. It's like, oh my God, now I understand exactly at least one of the problems you're trying to solve right now. And that was pretty interesting, and I just hope he understands that there's equivalence for that in a lot of things he didn't understand before. Right. But it was pretty interesting to see the impact, so to speak, that way.
Amory?
Well, my parents lived to 97, so they did get to understand what I was up to, and they had pretty diverse backgrounds. My mother did editing and social service administration. My dad was an engineer who started in electrical and engineering and chemistry, so of course he ended up as an optical metrologist. And when I was growing up, he was building unique scientific instruments in the basement. So, I grew up as an experimental physicist, and full frontal nerdity.
Chip off the old block, right?
But of course, what I do, and I've dabbled in music and photography and poetry and so on. So both hemispheres, and they were very good on that. But I end up working on not the world of design, but the design of the world. And that's exactly the kind of holistic view that they tried to inculcate. So I think they were pleased.
Well, God, you guys are lucky.
My parents were not in the arts or in design at all. My father was in the military, so it was quite staggering. My two older brothers, were all in the arts. So that was quite a big disappointment, I think. But I started out teaching, actually, and so my mom's side of the family is Japanese. So they, teaching is revered in a very different way. So as long as I did that, it was okay. And then I started practicing, and they finally figured out that I just made things like a book or whatever. You just point to paper stuff and say, that's what I do. So it kind of worked in the end.
With Dad, my dad was a broker. His idea was, we would call up, we just got this job. And he's like, how much are you getting for that? It's a contract signed. But really, but he was incredibly supportive. My mother knew she had 3 boys, and all of us were into the visual arts. We weren't sure exactly how we were going to make a living in it, but she definitely took us places, took us to art classes, really pushed. Well, didn't push, but created an environment that we could definitely be creative in. So it was good. So she's sort of getting excited now. She's getting to see all these projects, right. And whether she understands all the complexities behind them isn't really much, but she's really enjoying it. So.
Yeah, actually, I grew up maybe maximum 60 miles outside of New York City. So I spent a lot of time, kind of going back and forth and being shuttled to art lessons all the time. And, and all the other kids went to summer camp. I went to art school, So it was kind of, my parents were very conscientious about what I was doing and what they wanted me to do. But on the other hand, they weren't really aware of the subtleties of, the track I wanted to take. But that's okay, I think they had the right intentions, and that's really, where it's born.
Well, I was the cliche of the Chinese family wanting their son to be a doctor or lawyer, and it's definitely part of our family lore. So they were very disappointed. But then, before I decided to be an architect, I wanted to be a modern dancer, an actor, and then so they're actually relieved that at least unfortunately, my father was not a broker or interested in real estate, so didn't know anything about building. This just seemed very strange, and. But one thing for sure, I actually designed a stool for a very low-budget hotel. And so with such a tight space, so we actually create a footstool that's also a ottoman footrest, also a side table, and you just flip them around and around until you use them for different ways. And my father actually got excited about that. He goes, that's really practical. Can I have one? And then finally, a few years ago, we designed a lipstick for a Japanese cosmetic company. That's when my mother got really excited. Because I could supply her with endless numbers of lipstick.
Andrew?
We actually talk about this in the department. We're the information graphics department, and so we sort of wonder if our parents know what it is we're doing. There are cartographers in the department, and so it's pretty straightforward for them to explain to their parents, that map of foreclosures that was on the Times website. I made that.
You made that map, right?
There are others in the department. There's a guy named Kevin Qualey who creates many of the data visualizations for business coverage, and some of the charting forms that he's developed are fairly complex, and so he tells us about some of the conversations that he's had with his mother. It's pretty clear that she does not know what he's doing. She tells him he's doing great, but the thing that he told her to look at, she doesn't understand.
God, you guys have it made, though, most of you, you know, that you're like, there's this simpatico or this relationship, because my parents never understood anything about landscape architecture. Was always like, I worked on the airport in Charlotte and we were planting trees. I go home, Dad tells everyone, my son, he built the airport. So it was always from tree to world. So you guys had it made. This next one, just one answer would be really great. I'll start with Andrew. If you could do any other sort of, if you could change professions or discipline within design, what would it be?
Within design, I mean, I would like to change out of design.
No, you can't leave. That's the easy way out, right?
I haven't given this a lot of thought. I wouldn't mind teaching, you know. I actually have a plan to do a little teaching, and many of the members of the department do teach. I wouldn't mind having Simon Duenes' job and design the windows at Barney's. That would be kind of fun.
There you go. There you go.
Oh, this is really. I think I would like to be a connector, because I really think that all design addresses very similar. Disciplinarily, of course, I don't know the details of the various different disciplines. But I think that if we can find a way to really synergize all the different design disciplines somehow, would be a really strong force. You know, I happen to be both an architect and an interior designer. I don't see those names as being and all relevant as separatists. There's the same thing, but, you know, and yet they're very different design fields. And so I'm just obsessed with breaking those barriers between design fields and trying to make one continuous design fields. I mean, we're right now doing urban planning, we're doing buildings, we're doing residential interiors, we're doing houses, we're doing product. You know, the only hurdle is that you need to know the vocabulary and the materiality of in the processes of these things, and it does take a long time. So rather than going to learn all these things, is to collaborate with these different fields and trying to find something together.
Laurene, if you could move to a different discipline?
Well, you know, Constantine, my partner, was always like, oh, Laurene, you know, you'd make a great interior designer because you have taste and, you know. I mean, the truth is, you know, when I was young, I actually wanted to be a fashion designer. And I went to Parsons when I was 14, and I was like just ready to like rock the fashion world, but you know, it never really happened. You know, and eventually I ended up, you know, in advertising, illustration, fine arts, and then eventually product design. So it was kind of like a bit of trying everything before I could really get to where I am now. But the thing is, I feel like I ended up where I need to be, as opposed to like wishing I was somewhere else. I don't wish I was something else.
Not a wish, just if, you know, something in the
I don't
back
know if
of
there's
your
an
mind.
if, you know. I feel so definitive about this, Walter.
Okay, that's fine. I won't push anymore. I won't push.
Been there, done that.
Right. I'm like,
Mr. Sharples.
No more fashion.
So I sort of agree with these
I'll
two.
tell you the story
It's
later.
the opportunity to work with different skill sets within the design, within a design space.
So broader.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if I was forced into a particular area, and I was better at math, it'd be in aerospace.
I knew that was, yeah.
Well, I've been dabbling in lots of different areas, but actually the one I haven't had a chance to is landscape, so maybe.
Lots of room. Lots of room.
Yeah, well, I'm notoriously undisciplined, not the same as indisciplined, because I'm a recovering physicist that also went through chronologically, music, classics, math, some law, little medicine, linguistics, mountain photography. But then I started to diversify, because in our line of work, you need to pick up a couple of new disciplines a year. And I don't know what they're going to be, but they'll be fun.
Yeah.
And I end up doing a lot of architecture and engineering, but never studied any of them.
Fantastic. Seems like everybody wants to go where you're going.
I also want to I don't think I'd ever want to do anything different from what I'm doing now. But when I was younger, I used to say,
if I hadn't gone into engineering, I would have probably gone into architecture, and I still would like to try that, although I'd probably be frustrated at the time constants, the scales associated with that. One of the things I think I've really gravitated toward was some of that instant, much shorter design cycles. The thing you can do with software and interaction is extremely short iteration cycles, which I think is really interesting.
But it's an interesting mixture because normally we think of architects as being more in the right hemisphere and engineers on the left, and obviously you're integrated.
Yeah, that might be something that I think all designers actually have that aspect. Interestingly, I went to Cornell for engineering and actually to study computer graphics. And computer graphics at Cornell, that department actually grew out of the architecture school, not out of the engineering school. It was actually to pre-visualize and solve some of those problems about how these guys are dreaming up again because of long time constants. The big structures that just it would be really nice to be able to visualize before actually having to delve into even a model or something. So I think that anecdote's actually really telling about where my motivations are and why I decided to go into what I do.
Well, let's stay on the couch, okay? The next question would be, say sounds like most people have found that place, but I know along the way, it hasn't always been smooth. Has there been any major bumps in the road that, you got to and you were just like, I'm getting out of this, this is not worth it? And I'll start with you, Lauren, since you love
every day. Every single day of my career, there's a crisis. And, that's what kind of keeps us on our toes, Boym Partners. We're, because we're generalists. We get a lot of different types of projects coming through. And, there's always those moments where, we're, essentially a very small studio. We're pushing things back and forth. And, there's just this kind of dynamic, where, we get frustrated and we hit a wall. I mean, I think all designers get into this moment, where we want to push each other and we're both hitting walls and it's just very frustrating and, one of us storms out of the office or something like that. But I think, in general, I think there is, I think you have to do that to make you to really advance yourself professionally. You can't, you can't be afraid and hold back. If you hold back, you're not going to be able to, progress at all. So I think it's a good thing, essentially, that you want, that you get frustrated. I think frustration is an essential part of the design process.
You guys concur?
For me, the most frustrating thing, I guess, would be that I guess would hit on a periodic scale. I guess it's not the answer to your question. What was the one big thing? But I think one of the challenges we all face is how do we scale what we do, right? I mean, how do we increase the bandwidth of I think what maybe each one of us is capable of doing, or how do we leverage that expertise to fatten up and not just be bottlenecked by just ourselves in this craft? I'm still trying to figure out that problem. Yeah. It's a very difficult one.
No, for me, when I've had doubts, it's been more ideological, right? I mean, less about the day-to-day, and I just wonder, within the various disciplines, have there been those moments where it was sort of like, I'm at that fork in the road, and, maybe it's based on a set of values, or something much more sort of personal. Calvin?
I'm treading into psychological conditions. I think that's one of the biggest hurdles. Because as a creative person in the design, your ego is this thing that you just have to control or deal or reconcile or understand. And yet at the same time, we're all talking about the fact that in the end, the product of our work is not about us. It's about giving. So how do you get this, reconcile this beast? As one's humanistic and one egotistic. And I have to throw in a towel every morning, look in the mirror and say, who the hell, what monster am I today? Or am I a saint today or a monster today? And what am I conjuring up? In the end, it is through the filter that is our reality, our world, that we draw our inspiration. And the way you mix it with whatever it's this, and it's a constant struggle. And I don't know, maybe I'm too much of a drama queen, but it just kills me every day to draw that out, to find that equilibrium.
Yeah, you mean asserting yourself on the user versus being a servant to the user, right?
Well, I mean, you bring up something really important. I mean, to be good at what you do, there has to be a lot of self-determination, that you really have to believe in yourself. But on the other hand, I hear a lot of you talking in this idea about if you could do or move out of the discipline, you would want to collaborate and begin to sort of share more. That duality could cause frustration, right? Lauren, I was looking at you. That duality of right?
You were looking at me.
But this frustration, that you have a way of working, but then trying to embrace, a larger community or sets of communities could cause frustration as well. No?
No, I mean, I don't really know if that's, I think, design is an inclusive thing, and the idea is you try to fire on all cylinders simultaneously. It can't just be about, the psychological or the functional or the aesthetic or, the, use of an object. It has to be about a bigger thing. So I'm really, having, the idea is that everything should have a holistic balance, and it shouldn't be just about one aspect.
But isn't that the hard thing to do, is that balancing all that?
Well, we try, we try every single day, and when we don't do it, that's when we hit the wall, that's when we're going, okay, how, what are we, how are we solving the requirements of the project, plus, putting this kind of expressive element into it is also, that's another layer of meaning for us, it's another layer, but it can't conflict with the object, like you were just saying, it can't conflict with your, with your environment.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of constraints you deal with. And sometimes you impose those constraints. And sometimes they're imposed on you, and not necessarily by the client. There's a standard way that we're supposed to practice as architects. And when I went from I was trained in the fine arts and as a printmaker and painter, and when I finally decided to go to architecture school, I was going through the list of what I needed, and one of those things was a Mayline. And I'd never worked with a Mayline before, and I was very good at drawing straight lines without any piece of a tool in front of me to help me do that. But when I got this Mayline, it just kept getting in my way. I actually used it to clean my desk a lot. And if you saw my desk, you'd see why I needed to clean my desk. Anyway, what was interesting to me about that was certain devices, certain prescriptions actually didn't work for us very well. When we formed our office, there were 5 of us, 2 married couples and a set of identical twins. What was interesting about it, none of us had undergraduate degrees in architecture. We came at it from all these different disciplines. And so we all went to school because we thought for architecture that we want to do something, we want to design, we want to make these things real. And then we get into school and realize that's not a lot of what the faculty wanted us to worry about. So I don't know if we were overly pragmatic in our thinking, but when we got out of school, we realized it was pretty tough to make these things happen, especially when you're producing 2D drawings and you're expecting a builder to build it in 3D. And you're moving into that 4th dimension, and things get lost and change orders happen, and suddenly the things start hitting the roof. So we realized, we don't like how this works for us. This is not how we like to operate in our design space. So what do we have to do to change that? Before we even worry about, designing something cool, we got to figure out what tools we want to use. Right. And I think for the past 12 years, that's really what it's been about, is how can we use old tools that, stereometry that, hundreds of years old, but marry it with new technologies, and really they're tools. And that's really what has sort of been a way of foiling that frustration. But I think in the beginning it was realizing that we just couldn't keep working this way if we were going to grow.
Others have similar experiences, particularly from academia into practice. I find this very, interesting, because my next question is going to go back to teaching, and collaboration. But any other experiences through academia and then practice, and then finding that there are better ways of approaching your art or your work?
Well, we have a pretty diverse department in terms of professional backgrounds and educational backgrounds. I think maybe 3 of us came out of art school, and Only a couple have degrees in design. Some of us have advanced degrees in cartography or statistics, and the people who are not coming from a design background, I don't know that they ever thought that they would be designers, or maybe it's possible that they still don't think of themselves as designers. And so, it's been sort of interesting. I mean, we I guess they've been drawn to the desk, and we were able to sort of recruit them into the desk because, they saw how their skills could translate into the kinds of things that we do, into something that communicates how that might work, and we recognize that as well. And the desk has really benefited because we have this diversity.
This year is the 90th anniversary of the Bauhaus, and particularly the Bauhaus teaching. And this sort of leads to my next question, building on some of the things that Mr. Sharples said. What do you guys think is the best way to teach design? Within your discipline, I guess it could fall within your disciplinary framework.
I'm always at odds with this, frankly, how to teach design. I taught for at least 10 years, probably more, in 2 different universities. And, it's like, I sort of made a circle with, how, we would plan the curriculum and how the lessons would go and what types of tools we would use. And it's funny because we're even going, like now, if I were going to teach design, I would teach design more as like a hands-on type of thing. And I feel like, in a way, because designers have become so alienated from the products and the spaces that they're designing because they're doing everything on a computer, and there's like this sort of disconnect. And there's this sort of like inability to really understand scale and, have like an emotional relationship with the object. It's a very different type of design. But the thing is, you have to have something, when it's a product, you have to have something in a one-to-one scale, and you have to be able to hold it, and you have to test it, or test it in an environment, or see how it looks, or, try to operate it. And, you can't do that on a computer. I'm sorry. And as much as everybody wants to do these like really great computer renderings, I just don't think it's the best way to teach product design. And I will never think it's, I still think people need to work with their hands. They have to understand scale. There has to be like a connection, because it's about people and it's about being in the environment. It's not about something that's on a screen. So it's
I
different.
think it needs vision across boundaries, not being confined to a discipline. It needs to be experiential, hands-on. If you want to turn out practitioners, not theorists, there was a period when some of our schools of architecture got colonized by postmodernists, and they thought it was really amusing to design an uninhabitable building with a significator and a significand, except it couldn't even meet code. You couldn't be there. Anyway, they proved unemployable, so I think we got over that. I think I spend a lot of time when I teach, because I've dropped out of 2 universities and taught in 8 so far, trying to get people out of reductionist boxes and showing how to optimize whole systems for multiple benefits rather than isolated components for single benefits. So you get radical energy and resource efficiency, but it costs less to build. And I find one of the most common obstacles I have to overcome, besides the assumption of diminishing returns, is that apparently it's become fashionable to teach that design is the art of trade-off and compromise, as if it were a way to negotiate with yourself so you can't get what you want. Well, my friend Jay Baldwin was being taught this nonsense one day in design school in California. He was looking out the window watching a pelican catch a fish. And he said to himself, what this lecturer is saying cannot possibly be right, because nature doesn't compromise, nature optimizes. That pelican, he thought, is not a compromise between a seagull and a crow. Right. It's the best possible pelican. And after 90 million years, it's a really good pelican. So if you find yourself having to compromise between your design objectives, it probably means you haven't yet found the correct statement of the design problem. And that's, I think, the most important thing to teach, is letting go of our assumptions and just having beginner's mind.
Chris, you're shaking your head.
No, I agree 100%. It's Kelly Johnson, said, if it performs well, it's going to look good too. I'm sort of paraphrasing him, but the fact is, and in that sense, if you understand all the criteria or all the forces that are influencing the process, your design space, then you won't lead to compromise. It's a dynamic process. It's not a static one. It's like it's constantly changing. It's updating itself as you bring more players into the room, and then there's feedback. And your design is quite organic. Your process can be quite organic that way. But what's really exciting about when I read that, he's the founder of the Skunk Works, Lockheed Martin, and it really is a big place. Well, it's a place where a lot of great engineers could come together and really work on really hard problems. And at the end of the day, they solve those problems and they produce some really beautiful aircraft. And I think that's pretty exciting when those two worlds, the performance and the aesthetics, the looks, actually are very much one and the same.
It's the flip side of how in physics we say if a theory or an equation isn't beautiful, it's probably not true either.
Right. But don't you think that, there's a difference between education, to educate someone and to make someone learn? I'm really kind of down on education as we kind of known because you're taught a set of doctrines. And then it's talk about, and knowledge is important, but it comes with a boundary. Whereas if you set someone off to learn, then they can acquire the same amount of knowledge and then some. And it may be much more lateral. And I think in architecture schools in particular, we're very didactic, very polemical. So it's very much part of, in the educational kind of vein rather than learning. Now I just remember when I was a child, I was given piano lessons and drawing lessons. And both you have to learn. And I could never get beyond the piano lessons because I just couldn't master the craft, and the teacher was really disciplinary, like Czerny 499, and I just was never inspired by the beauty of music. I just, in fact, kind of stunted me to music because all I could remember was painful fingers and da 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 da. And of course you need the craft, but it's like if I would do it, if I kind of fell in love with it. And drawing was equally difficult, but somehow the teacher inspired me to just keep drawing circles, drawing lines. Just think about if you draw a straight line, your hand is floating. Whatever it is, I can't remember. It was
the line.
And it was really fun. And I'm like, circle. And I got good, and went beyond the line and circle. So it's how do we get back to that? Without going to third grade or something. I just think that when it comes to vocational learning, it became extremely structured.
Well, Paulo Ligari's dad took him out of school so as not to interrupt his education.
It's hard though because as I get older, I want to rely back on these sort of modernist principles about design in general, which has informed my understanding of all design disciplines. So in one way, I want to say that's the answer. But on the other hand, I have a little bit of hesitation around this sort of generalist notion. Everyone's going to be in a team. They're all going to collaborate. But what expertise does anyone have? I mean, I remember doing all of these exercises and becoming a very good graphic designer. And that allowed me to have some confidence about that particular area, which then led me to seek out other things. And so I get a little worried when we want to, not have some sort of sense of discipline or a sense of accomplishment around something.
Well, I totally agree. I think there's actually one of the disturbing trends I'm seeing is kind of a cheapening of the craft, or a kind of a poorer attitude toward actually accomplishment, or at least a respect for a certain, design is so interdisciplinary that you really need to collaborate, but collaborate not bringing a bunch of generals together, but collaborate with the strong practitioners in each field, whether it's engineering and spatial design and everything. So I I echo your point. I think it's dangerous to say how can you teach the kind of meta concept across when I think there has to be a lot of it all starts with strong foundational work in one of the crafts, and I think architecture certainly hasn't lost that attitude. But I think some of the other things, I think maybe because some of the tools are more accessible now, maybe there's an attitude shift about more everyday design. Maybe, I don't know, but I definitely feel that there's a weakening of the respect for some fundamental crafts.
It depends what level of education too, undergrad, graduate, because I remember proposing a PhD program in design, which there are very few, and most of them are crap.
But don't you think?
But the way we approached it was that, the PhD should not be ultra specialization. You shouldn't keep drilling down. Right. That's the moment where you should be bringing people together.
Well, PhD is about research. It's not just depth, but actually making a contribution there in that field. That's going beyond that level. I think you need to be able to participate with collaboration. One of the disturbing things I'm seeing in collaboration also is this attitude where I've done it. I've kind of dude ranched being an engineer for like a semester, and now I know it, so now I can communicate with an engineer and order him around. I think that's not a healthy attitude I'm starting to see in collaboration.
Well, you have to know what you're doing, or you'll be trying to violate the laws of physics or something like that. But look, if I want to change how somebody thinks about design, if I want to get them good at what my mentor Edwin Land talked about when he said people who seem to have had a new idea have often just stopped having an old idea. I'll use examples outside their discipline. If I want to change how you design a refinery or a data center, I'll show you a car or a house and vice versa, because then it's non-threatening. So I think that exposure across the boundaries is terribly important to shaking up our habits we fall into that keep us from seeing simpler solutions.
I mean, cross-pollination exposure is great. There just has to be a non-loss of respect and kind of understanding how deep that field can actually really go.
Yeah, on the other hand, the most subversive thing I tell students, and it kind of upsets the prof sometimes, is that there are few, if any, fields that a smart and motivated person can't learn as much about in 6 months as most, not all, but most people in the field know. And once you realize that, you can be perfectly uninhibited and run around the whole domain of knowledge and skill and pick up anything you need when you need it without worrying you're on somebody else's turf. That's not an excuse for not really learning what you're doing, but at least it breaks down a lot of the barriers that get in the way of being creative.
Sorry. I was just thinking that going back to education or schooling, that we're all so results oriented. And then there's also the agenda. And I find that in students today, the reason why the craft has been side to the side and you can actually make a facsimile of excellence through all these sort of tricks with the technology or whatever tools you have that stands in for craft. Right. You can fool most people most of the time. But what are you trying to get at? I mean, in a way, ultimately, of course, is the person fools themselves because they didn't get anywhere. But it points to me that there somehow within contemporary culture there is a getting there, wherever there, they want to get there. The journey of learning, a journey to acquire technique or craft or heaven forbid, revelation and is sort of trivialized in the face of results. I don't know whether it's the school's pressure to make everyone create results or this culture that's very appearance-oriented and end product-oriented. You need to be cool, you need to be hip, you need to be, and all kinds of adjectives, so that confuses a person who is in the journey for in a creative field to want to succeed without going through the paces. I mean, we have to practice. Right. And it has to be fueled by a real commitment because we really believe in it.
Somebody interviewed Pablo Casals and said, Senor Casals, you're 92, you're the greatest cellist the world has ever known. and yet you keep practicing 6 hours a day. Why do you do it? He said, I think I detect signs of improvement.
Awesome.
So let's move on with that, because we'll never solve this issue, and I think the 8 of us will probably have different or sort of diverse opinions about sort of education. But this, I guess, Amory, when you were sort of talking about this notion of everyone having a kind of a solid base or foundation, do you guys think anyone can be a designer?
We are all designers, whether we know it or not, and whether we're trained in it or not. We compose our lives, among other things. We solve practical problems every day by figuring out what to do to achieve the effect we want. That's design. I don't want to trivialize the design arts, which of course have immense depth, but this is not somehow a radical monopoly and you have to be on a pedestal and labeled a designer to do design.
I see the crowd nodding, so.
Well, Joseph Beuys said everybody's an artist.
Right.
Basically, everybody has the capacity to be creative. They have to desire it, but the question is, no matter what you do, could you do it better? Is it a question of efficiency? Is there a simpler way to manage that complexity? And so, is that working on the trading floor? Or is it working as a salesperson in a store, figuring out, is this the best way to stack things? So I think it's really important, but I don't think that's the way we have been raised. This is not the climate that produces that type of motivation.
And that's part of the existential equation. We have to make sense of our world. I mean, every sense in Steve, what you said, some of your team members think they're not designers, but in fact, of course they are. I think that title, maybe the word design is overused or something, or too categorized.
Or it seems so specialized.
Specialized.
Everyone can write, but not everyone's a writer. And I think everyone can design, but not everyone's a designer. In that same way. I mean, in the sense that it should be a basic kind of vocabulary, and this should be discussed and more seriously and taught in schools. I mean, there's piles of research sitting around all the countries in the world about how to do this. It's just that no one's taken the initiative to say, well, design is an important disciplinary aspect. It's just as important as science and art.
So to me, there's two pieces: the craft of it, to actually manifest it, and then the making sense of things. So maybe most people can't make something because they don't have the craft that we were just talking about to make it happen. But I think the rigor of thinking, and that's where the dream client is one who has been thinking as sincerely about whatever it is they want us to do as we have. And so you can collaborate because we're on the same path, but we have the added advantage of having gone to school and practice all these years to make a building or make a widget, whatever. So I think it's better to kind of start thinking. I think everyone can design or think about designing, but designers manifest them into physical configuration. I mean, so I don't think we actually refine our kind of categorization of things as
well,
fine.
there's 3.8 billion years of design genius outside these walls, and the 99% of designs that didn't work got recalled by the manufacturer. The 1% of species that are around can teach us a lot about design. I think the next great revolution in design is biomimicry, Janine Benyus's book of that title.
Right.
If you go to biomimicry.org, biomimicry.net, you'll get just an astounding array of organisms that have solved our design problems if you know which ones to ask. And yet we still have not quite figured out academically that we ought to be teaching design much more from a biological perspective. It's still rooted in Newtonian physics.
Right.
Okay.
Because genetics and all that can immediately translate survivalism into really great ways of staying, to perpetuate the species, right?
Yep.
Well, we should move on because we have a beautiful crowd out here, and I'd like to take some questions. But I did have one last question to ask you. After making a work, whether it's piece of paper, building, object, are you guys satisfied, or do you just redesign it?
Yes.
Yeah, every time.
Of course.
Yeah.
You can always make it better, and probably you say, how could I have been so stupid as to take this whole approach in the first place? What I should have done is, and then you start, we're always striving to get to simplicity, and you only get there through complexity.
Yep.
I think it was Einstein who said, I wouldn't give a nickel for the simplicity on this side of complexity, but I'd give my life for the simplicity on the other side of complexity.
You all agree? Okay.
I don't know. The criteria is always changing. I mean, every time, there's a new project, it's sort of, I guess maybe because we have a more cinematic process than most designers, it sort of opens up a new can of problems. And, and that's kind of, that's very exciting. But I don't, I think the most exciting thing about design is not knowing where you're going as opposed to knowing where you're going. Because you really discover a lot along the way, and you just let things happen or just, come into the work.
We're all wandering in the wilderness.
Huh?
We're all wandering in the wilderness.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, in a
if we go
way.
back to evolution or biomimicry, is that it's never perfect. You continually evolve with your environment as long as you're aware what your environmental conditions are and responding appropriately to it. I mean, otherwise you go into this masochistic place, which is you're just totally depressed. If you're into product, your product is never perfect.
Right.
It's only perfect at that moment, and then it has a shelf time until it's improved to the next moment.
But during that process, with every project you're doing, you're sort of constructing, that design knowledge, and you're building off of it. And I guess if there is a immediate frustration I can think about in our profession, on average, it takes about 5 years, if you're lucky, to get a project from start to completion. And during that whole process, you're already innovating and thinking about the next project. So how can you sort of take some of that you just learned and put it into the 5th year of the project that you've been working on?
I think that's a particularly bad thing for architects. That
Yeah.
Gestations,
Yeah.
so long.
Well, you figure, after 40 years, you got, 5 or 6 good ones, right? If that.
It's like a roll of 36, right? You got one or two.
Well, I'd like to thank you guys for being a really nice panel, but I'd like to open it up to the audience, and I think we have a microphone over here to the left, and if anyone has questions for the panel, please state your name and the panelist that you'd like to ask your question to, or if it's the entire panel. It doesn't look like anyone. There's a microphone on this side as well.
The microphone's over there in back of you.
Yes.
Hi, how's it going? My name's Amy Kay.
Hey.
My question is, how do you guys feel about toy design?
A what?
Toy design for children? Toys?
Toy design. How do you guys feel about toy design for children?
Are you a toy designer?
You did say that, right?
Amy, are you a toy designer?
Yes.
Oh, okay. That's kind of it's funny because I think in product design there's all these different types of niche markets that you can find yourself in. Like, you're a transportation designer, you're a toy designer, you're a product designer, but I feel like I can't really take toy and segment it out of the whole product design lexicon into its own professional niche. I think it's all part of a bigger picture. And, it depends, whether it's educational or not. It depends, whether it's gender specific. It depends whether it's a narrative toy. I mean, there's so many, it's a very general question,
Well, I'm not a toy designer, but I do
No, me neither.
think about play and learn.
Yeah.
Right.
And gaming. Yeah. I mean. It's
game.
Game.
As a way of expanding your experience. So, I think it's really essential, and it's not just for kids either.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the
Right.
It's you got the age scale to deal with, and because I have a 4-year-old, and you try to engage them, and if it's interesting, if it's a toy that works at my scale and his scale, then that's a great toy. I mean, obviously the Legos to me are a perfect toy.
I mean, toys for the most part are interactive. I mean, it's a subset of interaction design, definitely, and it's in particular, it's about some of that. I mean, game design similar to video game design, or even casino game design, or giving you that little bit of reward, all those kind of things. It's a completely, also really nascent field, a field that's really in its infancy as well. And it's just as interdisciplinary in a lot of different ways.
Only months ago, I got to meet and talk to a toy designer, and discovered it's an astounding storehouse of very sophisticated, cheap, mass-produced technologies you can use for a lot of other interesting things.
Well, to tell you how much these guys like toys, we were having a luncheon this summer, and there were toy robots on the table. Not one was left when these guys left the room. So they basically are attached to the toys. Yes. This young lady here.
Hi, my name is Mala Desai, and my friend and I, we are actually recent grads from Parsons, but we just completed a program that has sort of resulted in us being hybrids of sorts. We both have previous degrees, so this program was for people who have, previous bachelor's degree. So this is our second degree, and I'm finding myself having graduated in the middle of this wonderful recession, and in a weird sense, it's put us on the cusp of another decision, which is, do we change careers before we even began the career we thought we were about to head into? And what I wanted to know is just a kind of a general question for everyone is, do you have any advice for how to stick in this field? And if that is the right direction, how to maybe harness the hybridness that we've...
Did you tell us what degree you were? I didn't hear. Degree.
Your degree?
Your degree.
Specifically, my previous degree is in communications and journalism, but from Parsons in graphic design.
What's your passion?
The combination of the two, so writing and design. But I've literally found myself wondering, am I even in the right field? And I don't know if it's a function of the recession, or am I really starting to hate design?
Well, but if you're asking that question, it means you're going to find what you're meant to do. Just keep looking, and you'll know when you're there.
Well, you have the unfortunate combination of the writing, disintegration of the writing and the disintegration of the graphic design field of print, the end of print.
I was going to ask that too. Working with the New York Times, do you feel like it's going to become obsolete as well? That was another question.
I'm sorry, what was the
Basically, do you feel like you're going to lose your job? No, I'm just wondering if you think working in the field of print really, but I know interactive has.
Yeah, I mean, we spend maybe half our time working in print and half of our time developing interactive graphics. And no, I'm not personally worried about losing my job. Your educational background kind of makes you a good fit, actually, for an information graphics department. If I could only think of one that was hiring employment, I would point
I'll
you in
just
that
stalk
direction.
you till
I graduated out of undergrad in the '80s recession, and so it doesn't seem like new. There seems to be another recession every 10 years, but you might just think about it differently. If you think about, usually you're trained as a practitioner, right? So I'm only validated if I work as a graphic designer for some company or some corporation or something like that, which is ridiculous, because you have a set of skills, and if you approach it maybe more like an artist would, says, what can I do, every day, or how do I keep myself in that field? And it doesn't have to be defined by having employment, such a standard or traditional or conventional employment relationship. And a lot of younger designers are also banding together in more in collective efforts, which is a combination of socialization projects, basically, but also to keep all of those skills and ideas active and alive. And I think that's the key to riding this thing out. And a lot of the people I also graduated another recession from graduate school, and a lot of people, they just open their own businesses, which sounds crazy, but I mean, that's what you're forced to do. And they've all been very successful, actually.
Yeah, the model of business is changing, so it isn't these large monolithic institutions, and you define yourself or validate yourself, you said, by working for one of them. I mean, the power of, everything going on with the internet, of course, is the fact that, it is much more accessible for an individual to continue practicing and actually even make a business out of it. When we interview engineers who perhaps are out of work, first question we ask is, so what have you been doing? It's a very it's a full-time job keeping up with the field that if we're working, we actually feel we're behind in. So you have to continue practicing in your craft. I think it's actually quite easy to do, even without the support structure of a large company. And as engineers, we always give ourselves etudes, things to sharpen your skills. They may not have a specific purpose, but they're there just to keep yourself sharp. And like I said, it's actually a full-time job keeping up to date with this field. So.
Being beached is a wonderful opportunity to learn new things and try new disciplines.
You may probably not want to hear this.
It's a blessed opportunity.
I was just thinking that, we all learn things thinking that there's a kind of prescribed destination. And sometimes that destination is a terrible destination. And in a good times, you kind of dutifully go there. And it may even submerge any kind of hidden or not very overt proclivities that brought you to those disciplines. So I think I would invite you to really think hard of why did you go from this discipline, enter this discipline, enter that discipline. There has to be some rationale or some kind of impulse in you that is very much you. And those are just tools that you have. Those tools don't always need to be translated into a job.
Career?
Yeah, into a job. Maybe you can use it for something else.
One of the more interesting things that's actually happened for product designers in the recession, and it's not quite your field, but a lot of young designers I notice, I'm like, what are you going to do when you graduate next year? I know a lot of students, and they're all like, we're going to open our own studios. And I'm like, no, you don't. Don't do it, But there's actually now like an impetus. I notice it's almost like, sort of like a punk rock kind of throwback in design where people are like making their own stuff. The tools are out there. Production has really become much more accessible. You can make anything anywhere you want all over the world through the internet. There's all these connections. And then there's the venues to show the work and, after you make it, or to sell the work and the distribution. So, I see designers having a more independent role in society and maybe making micro productions of their own and not so much, trying to follow and look for a job in the corporate marketplace.
Yeah, the other thing that's interesting is actually, I think we're right now in just the middle of increasing awareness of design for companies to actually say it's actually something that's necessary. So you could actually help that situation by actually evangelizing or actually, again, creating that job that you need to get into by, again, making it aware that this good work, good design work is actually something worth, creating a position for, or, that a company should have as part of their skill set.
You have all the counseling you need, right? Right there. Young lady here. Yes.
Hi, my name is Laura. I work as a fine art consultant, but I went to design school. My question is for Walter. I was recently at the De Young, and one of my favorite parts was the landscape design. And I was wondering how much, if any, you took the permanent collection at the museum into consideration with the landscape design.
As you know, the permanent collection is all over the place, right? So I would say her question was, at the De Young Museum, the collection is, I think they have a Pacific Coast connection. They also have a modern collection. I mean, they're all over the place. And the new director does fashion, actually. He's been doing a lot of clothing exhibitions. And the kind of eclectic collection, the gardens are really eclectic in the same way. And I think it wasn't something that was overtly part of the concept, but it literally came out because we had 4 different donors that had 4 different visions that was in a public sphere. So it actually came out to be an eclectic collection of things. So I think it worked out fine. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Megan, and I'm a landscape architect, and my question actually is also for Walter, but then also for everyone else on the panel. I think one of the exciting things about landscape is that the projects grow and change and evolve once they've been constructed, and there's certain things about the projects that you can't predict as you're designing them, and I was just wondering how you factor in the kind of changes in environment and climate and landscape and vegetation in your own work, and then also for the other designers on the panel, maybe do you kind of consider that evolution and change that you can't control in your designs once they're sort of put out into the world?
Well, I'll start it, panel, since you guys have been talking. I think in landscape it's really hard. Unless you have a client that's out there every day with the roller and the edger, or the whole sort of town of immigrants or whatever, taking care of it. It's really hard, and you have to let go. I was just actually at a project that was done 6 years ago, and I was there the other day because they want to make changes. And they were like fretting that I would not let them make changes. And I was like, this is yours, right? I left this 6 years ago. But this idea that landscape, is something that's going to be different the next day. 20 years down the road, it's going to be very different. And I think I'm from the school where you try to, how do I say, make a context for it, right? And for me, it's that framework, of how you put the spaces together, and it's less the accoutrements, right? The accoutrements are going to change, but if I come back in 20 years to a design, I want spatially for it to have that same kind of set of bones to it. But whether the objects have changed, I think that's not up to me. I'm talking about from benches, all that stuff that you see out there that we spend a lot of money on. To me, that's like, I always, when I used to move every other year, you'd find an apartment and you'd go, wow, this is a great space, and you bring all your crap, right? And then you're like, oh, this place sucks, right? And then you're like moving, you move all your stuff out and you look at the space and go, wow, that's a great space again, right? And it's the same kind of thing, and I think if you can think in that way.
Well, in a way, landscape seems obviously something that's mutable. But architecture is mutable too, in some, counterintuitive way. And I think it's something to be celebrated. We age, we die, new generations come, everything changes. In fact, I would say that the seeming immutability of architecture is a deficit rather than a benefit in the social world. And I think any good designers, good architects, good anyone, understands some basic DNA of human environments and allows them to thrive in any kind of conditions with good furniture or bad furniture, or a tree that's this big or eventually grow to be very large and dies. And what makes Central Park or Rome, eternal, even as it changes,
One of the most
what's the
exciting-
magic of design.
Well, you're suggesting it's a living system, right?
Yeah, it's a living organism.
Your craft, it's about your field. You're producing a living product,
Right.
and it's dynamic. And I guess it's some other I guess disciplines here. It's the saliency of what that design is maybe a little more literal, or it might actually have fuzzier edges.
Well, there's very few designs that actually get better with age, and landscape is actually one of those where it does reach its maturity. I have a particularly interesting case because we have a Minneapolis sculpture garden, and it was designed 25 years ago, and now we have to kind of preserve it because we're a museum. We have this collection of gardens, right? So we have to try to preserve it. So it's an interesting question about how far do you go, and what can you do, and codes change, and the species don't always work out. So it's a really complicated area, but really fascinating one.
One of the most exciting things I see happening in architecture is that under the aegis of biophilic design or biophilia, we're bringing the landscape into the building. We're embracing nature in the design because it turns out people have an innate affinity for nature, life, and the life process. And if you bring nature into the building, you have healthier, happier, more productive people. It's not just a more beautiful place. So Judy and I wrap our house around a semi-tropical jungle. All 4 of our banana trees are fruiting right now. Now this happens to be at 7,100 feet in the Rockies with no furnace, and it's cheaper to build that way. So that makes it even more fun.
But the thing is, especially in terms of architecture, it's always believed that you're working in a static environment. It's not dynamic, frozen music.
Right.
But the fact is, again, something we learned from the aerospace industry. They are moving. They believe in this concept of open architecture. And if you're going to build something, the most sustainable thing you could do is make sure it doesn't get torn down. So how are you going to do that? You have to design something that people feels important and it can adapt and change. Right. How does that open architecture idea get embraced within this sort of climate that we operate in? And so that's something that you sort of keep thinking about. And there's a point when you leave and somebody else takes over, and you just let it go.
Stuart Brand has a wonderful book called How Buildings Learn that says every building is a forecast, every forecast is wrong. So design for flexibility. But I thought you were going in a different direction. You're designing buildings for people, which are actually organisms, not machines.
Right.
So if you go into a good Japanese modern office building, you may find there are subliminal whiffs of sandalwood and jasmine in the air system to stimulate your sensorium. And instead of having a thermostat and a humidistat to hold the conditions constant, they'll actually have a little pseudo-random number generator that jitters them around because they know that you will, again, be happier, healthier, more productive in a subtly dynamic environment like we grew up in than in this wholly artificial static environment, which is simply a theoretical construct, not the way the human organism likes to be.
We have another question?
My name is Laura Fisher, and I have a question for the Times specifically and then the panel generally. I would like to know what went into the design decision to reduce the typeface and make it light in the Sunday magazine so that now so many of us, thank you for applauding, so many of us have to wear stronger glasses in order to read it. Was it purely financial to fit more words on a page? So that's my general question, but that's my specific question. But the general question is, what role does age and generational needs and so on play in design decisions, and do manufacturers test out designs on different audiences? For example, when you see some things on TV, everything is an instantaneous image, and even though, let's say it's a design show, and the goal is to present design accomplishments, the camera lingers so minimally on any one particular thing that you really can't absorb it, or at least someone my age can't absorb it. So I'm wondering how you handle needs of different generations and different ages in the design process.
Well, I'm going to completely dodge your specific question. That was not my decision to make. I don't work for the Sunday magazine. It's a different set of designers who do. Answering your second question about designing for different age groups and getting feedback, we can design things, interactive pieces, so that they are customizable, so that people can make them work, so that they can make them functional. We aren't perfect when it comes to that sort of thing, but it's certainly a goal with each piece that we develop, and I think we're getting better at it. So that's kind of how we approach that question.
Anyone else like to add to that? The age, generational, gender?
Well, all kinds of diversity.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the first thing you ask as a designer is, if it's for a specific user, or if it is more general, if it's a human interface, or if it's one for a specific demographic or a specific age range or whatever. And whenever you do user testing, it's almost always the first axis is the age, and then sex, and a bunch of other parameters that there's a rich discipline in designing for an age group or for generally. And sometimes it's, of course, really beautiful design is one that actually can accommodate almost everything. It's much easier to design for one specific thing or for the power user or something. But it's pretty fundamental to design in general, to be cognizant of who your user is.
Well, I would just add, to the public realm, I think in this country we've kind of overly analyzed age groups generation, and we've designed specifically for them, whether they're children, whether it's the elderly, but we tend to separate them versus more celebrate the diversity of creating spaces where you could have that diversity, and you could sort of just look around. There are playgrounds where if you're one of these people, you saw them at a playground, you'd probably worry. If they didn't have kids with them, you'd look at them and go, they shouldn't be there. But this idea that, I think someone said it earlier, that, we don't think about the collective to a certain degree. We kind of tend to separate things up. Are there any other questions from the audience? Yes, sir. You have to speak very loud since the microphones are gone now.
My name is Steve. A lot of people say that design is a useless profession, specifically like graphic and fashion design. I want to know, should we as designers justify that it is something necessary, or should we celebrate it as just the skill we have?
So who said that design is... I hadn't heard that.
He said he heard it in a lecture.
I'm not on trend, my God.
What kind of designer are you, by the way? You said you're a designer. What kind of a useless designer are you?
You say like that fashion design, it isn't necessary.
People don't need to wear clothes.
Yeah.
People don't need to read books. People don't need to use computers. They don't need objects in tools in their everyday life.
I think it speaks more to kind of a predominant, I was going to say stereotype, but maybe it's not, a predominant image of what fashion design is or what graphic design isn't, that it's largely, worthless or whatever. I mean, it's promoting different agendas, but that's up to you to redefine that. I mean, why does fashion have to be dictated by this neighborhood over here? People do need clothes. I mean, it's a whole different way of thinking about it that doesn't fit into these niches that you've been trained to fit into, because the schools are trying to pair you up. It's like an employment agency, dating. You do this, you put this in your portfolio, you go out there and you get this kind of job. That works for a lot of people, but it doesn't have to work for everyone. So it's up to you to say, well, I think it'll be interesting. Why can't clothes be, long shelf life? Not short shelf life, different questions.
Perhaps they're addressing the state of those design fields as they are today, which is either dominated by large industries manipulating the public, or they're being trivialized by marketeers. But the actual discipline themselves have so much. I mean, it's essential to the very core of our existence.
So has Project Runway helped or hurt the cause?
Yeah,
well, I'm asking, has Project Runway helped or hurt the cause?
Sorry?
Has Project Runway helped or hurt the cause?
You're asking me?
Yeah, no. Do you think?
You're out. Now, I don't know. Ask him.
That's not what she says.
Or hurt the cause? I mean.
Is that what she says?
Well, I think it helped the idea of the reality show, that people could actually have some talent, and you could actually demonstrate that to somebody else. I mean, most reality shows, there's no basis for talent. It takes nothing to appear on screen.
But to scale it within a certain time frame, you couldn't do that. I don't think you could do that with an architect.
Right.
I mean, but I actually think it did work. I think Project Runway brought people in and said, oh my God, they go into a store, buy all this material and come back, and some of them pulled off some really great designs. And you saw them do it. I thought that was great.
You know what, the thing that I watch all these shows religiously, and my qualm... No, I love it. I love reality TV. I think it's really reflective of our culture. But the real issue being the level of discourse on these shows is usually very low.
Yeah, all popular.
And that's a problem. Like the other day, I was watching Vimeo and I came across Philippe Stark's new reality show from, there's a Philippe Stark reality show. Yeah, in England on the BBC, and it's phenomenal.
Really?
But it's not about the contestants. You know, in America, all the things are about, you know, all the shows are about the contestants and their issues and their problems, whereas this is all about Stark, and it's highly entertaining. And, you know, in a way, I think it actually does the profession in a way like kind of a service, because everybody, you know, even though not everything he says is, you know, really tangible, but you really kind of get the feel of what being a design, what a designer is about. When I see somebody judging, I don't really feel, I don't really get the depth of their ability as a designer.
So you're saying that we need to really demystify these disciplines and take it away from the current kind of cliches that may have a time, a sell-by date.
That's why I asked whether it helps or hurt, because you were just noting, and I totally agree, the poor dialogue, or and obviously it's because the show actually has a different function really than necessarily its goal is to disseminate what really happens in design. So I actually don't know. I think there are some elements of what whoever told you that might draw upon the wrong things from watching a show like that.
Okay. Well, again, I'd like to thank the audience for coming out on the Tuesday night. Thank you so much. And I'd like to congratulate my esteemed colleagues here. And there are more events happening at the Cooper Hewitt this week. So I think out in the lobby there are various posters and handouts. And thank you all for coming out tonight.